This being the holiday season connects. This being the enrollment period connects. A lot of things connect, so hence the title. So about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I forget exactly when, we had our homecoming dance here. Last year, you may remember, was a particularly memorable homecoming because it was the first time that we've been able to have any large organized gathering for our students, and we really opened up something special, so we were able to rent out the town green and put a big tent and heaters, and it probably was a one-time only thing because we may or may not have done a fair amount of damage to it. But nevertheless, this was the first year in a number of years where we were able to have our homecoming dance here. And this is the place where it was intended to be. Interestingly, we didn't really foresee that the excitement would still be at last year's level, so we had to sell out. It wasn't something that was part of the design. So we'll make accommodations for that going forward. But as you can see, for a whole host of reasons, homecoming matters to our kids. I can tell you it's the least interesting thing, I think, when talking and planning. As Jen and Patrick know, I usually tune out. I'm clearly old and out of touch and an introvert. But for the kids, they really love that day. For the dressing up reasons, for the having fun reasons, for the not having to focus on by what means and to what extent reasons. For all kinds of reasons. It seems to be more appreciated, longed for, than it ever has been in our history, which is interesting because there really wasn't like a point at which we started advertising it differently, but for whatever reason the kids have begun to crave it to a level that they hadn't before. So what's great at this place, another former store, a former, in this case, t-shirt shop, is able to be converted to that sense of home for both East and West kids, and we see that among other things in these pictures here. This is December of 2016. That is Johnny. Not his first time in the spotlight. For those of you who are fairly new, we have a tradition where in December we put a call out to alumni to come back and speak to our seniors and our juniors to talk about their Sturgis experience, their transitioning to college and or adult life, advice, affirmations about Sturgis. It's a really interesting point in our alumni development because they get to come back through the doors at a different level of maturity with some hindsight. And it's really powerful for our 11th and 12th graders who are in the midst of their experience, have mixed feelings about their experience, and for many of them, they're ready to leave and go elsewhere. So it's a really important day. And I think this picture is particularly interesting because if you weren't there, you might be wondering where that is. Because those walls, although it is in the Sturgis yellow, those walls aren't Sturgis walls. Those walls are the walls of the resort and conference center across the street from Sturgis West. To make a long story and challenging story short, about this time 6 years ago, Sturgis West experienced a major flood. And instead of doing what I would probably do now, then I said, hey, let's take a day off and then let's go to school for 2 weeks in a hotel. And we did. And it was interesting because Jen at one point asked me, what are we going to do about the alumni reunion? And I said, don't ask me, that's 2 weeks away. And then the next day she asked me, I said, don't ask me, that's 1 week and 4 days away. And at a certain point she asked me, I said, okay, what should we do? And at that point it seemed like we could pull it off. So Sturgis West alumni came to the Resort and Conference Center into a ballroom, spoke to Sturgis West kids who were going to school in a ballroom, and talked about Sturgis and what makes it Sturgis and what you learn there that you can transfer to other places. So it's an interesting story to me tying into this idea of home, and whether it's 427 or 441 or 529 or 105 or Resort and Conference Center or our respective home offices and or kitchen tables for the better part of the last 2 or 3 years, there's a sense of home created that is probably as important, if not more important, than anything else that we do. So I mentioned 2022, which is where we are now for a short time remaining, and I mentioned 2016, where Johnny was and what was happening then. This is Homecoming 2019. This is the last homecoming at 529 we had before the pandemic. This was the first one that we had at 529. You can see the joy, you can see the excitement. So when I look at these pictures, I think about what was going on at those various times, and I look at the faces, I find myself, hey, who are those students? Whether it's Oscar or Johnny, who are those students? But then when I think about 2016 to 2019 to 2022, then I think about the enrollment period happening right now where 8th graders are applying to our school. I wonder who are our future students? And then what home are we actively creating for our students now? And what home are we actively creating for our students in the future? So we don't really talk about the board that much. I've heard about them over the last few years, in particular, here and there. Much of what they do purposely is kind of done quietly. Much of what they do is done to make sure that you can focus on what your job is, which is, for example, today, going to the professional development sessions and then working with our kids. But I thought with this idea of home and who our students are and who our students are going to be, it might be helpful to take a few minutes to talk about our board, and particularly some board goals. Because as you can imagine, over the last 3 years, starting in, say, March 2020, the board hasn't been really that heavily involved in long-term creative problem solving. It's been very much focused on how to make sure we do our best through a pandemic. But as we moved through last year, we were able to bring a board consultant in to help us as a team be really thoughtful about what we wanted our goals to be. It was about a 4 or 5 month long process, finalized about a month ago. So the first thing that the 8 people that you see up there committed to is they want to make sure that they're learning actively, and we phrased it this way: the adverse impacts of societal destabilization on student well-being and learning. Disrupted learning, social-emotional impacts, the fact that we were so focused on our kids that we had during the last 2 or 3 years that we're just now beginning to turn our attention to the kids we didn't have then but have now, and just that continuous examination of what do kids today, based on what they've been experiencing, need that maybe we haven't offered before. This group wants to know more about that. Who are our students? Who are our future students? How do we create a sense of home? At the same time, things have gotten a little bit turbulent, whether it's socio-politically speaking, how the intersection of socio-political interactions with schools and schooling and education around the country, which has always been a highly politicized thing, and now is as well, and pretty ever-present. Climate change, things that society is wrestling with. This board wants to know how Sturgis can evolve. Because Sturgis needs to evolve because our students are living in an evolving world, and our future students, it's going to be even more evolved, or at least changed. And how can that group of people fortify Sturgis to the extent possible? I wrote to you last year in May, and I said, speaking of one time only, we can make a 10% flat raise work across the board. Fortunately, we could do that. It monkeyed with our salary ranges and system. We don't know what's going to come next and how that works. But the board knows that the most important aspect of what we give to kids is you. And you need to live in a changing world with inflation and high housing. So the board is convening a subcommittee to make sure how do we continue to evolve while taking care of the kids and make sure that your needs are met to the extent possible. And last, and I think particularly germane for my talk, the board has been, is, and continues to be very interested in making sure that it is as powerful as it can be in supporting an evolving student body and an evolving faculty, specifically with diversity. So the star is above the president of the Board of Trustees picture. Her name is Pollyanna Woka. Many of you have heard her. She's spoken to our faculty, but maybe not everybody was there that day. If you're an East teacher or counselor, or staff member, you might know Pollyanna as Sarah or Deborah or Isaac's mother. She's been with the Sturgis community in that role for about 6 years now. And about 3 or 4 years ago, she was recruited to join the Sturgis board because the board recognized that there were a lot of reasons why she would be excellent for our board, but her story and her reach in particular dovetails nicely with who we're becoming. So a very quick bio of Pollyanna is that she and her family, she came as a middle schooler to Barnstable from Brazil, knowing no English at that time. Graduated from Barnstable High School, built a business, got married, raised kids, built another business, went back to school at Four Seas, went back to school to get her bachelor's, has gone back to school to get her master's, has sent 1 child through Sturgis, and 2 are still here. So when Pollyanna and I sat down at the beginning of her sort of recruitment process, she asked me what my hopes would be for her. And I said, well, you're so much more powerfully positioned to influence the reality that we want in the future than I am. And so with Pollyanna's first-hand experience and ability to communicate in the language of the heart of some of our immigrant families, Pollyanna has been doing dedicated outreach, most specifically in Barnstable and Dennis Yarmouth, over the last few years. The board, as I mentioned before, prefers to work sort of quietly, and the board has been working quietly on some things that I'll share with you in the future. So I mentioned to you 2016, 2019, 2022. So our largest sending district in 2019, and then going back to probably about 2012, right around the start of West, has been Sandwich. The town of Sandwich was very instrumental in our ability to replicate. We would not have been able to fully mirror, to double in size so quickly if it weren't for the town of Sandwich. The town of Sandwich is also amongst the whitest percentages of towns in the entire state. So when it comes to diversity, that wasn't one of the things, for the most part, that our Sandwich contingent was able to offer us. Some interesting developments here. And again, I mentioned to you that the board has been quietly committed, as have I, to creating a new reality. So in October of 19, which is right about when that homecoming dance photo was taken, there were 187 Sandwich residents that attended Sturgis East and West. And you can see that there's been a 36 delta since then. So 36 fewer kids from Sandwich attending Sturgis now. So if you're new to the area, or you're like Lauren and me, and you don't have kids, and so all of this sort of seems like weird stuff until it becomes a Sturgis reality, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a preview, not really what the high schools look like in Sandwich and Barnstable, because we're really having a forward-thinking conversation, right? So the schools don't neatly mirror each other because they have different configurations. So there are a variety of schools in Barnstable at different grade levels. And so there's not a neat comparative match. But I'm giving you 2 schools that are similar age ranges. And this data is for the May of 2022. So it's the end of last school year. So the Oak Ridge School in Sandwich, the end of last year, had about 740 students. And when you look at the percentage of students whose families speak a first language other than English, it's 3.5%. When you look at the amount by percentage of English language learners in the town of Sandwich attending Sandwich Public Schools, it's 1.4%. And you can see the students with disabilities percentage, the high needs percentage, which means either economically disadvantaged or special education services being received, and then finally low income. So that is a loose demographic of the town that has been our largest sending district for the better part of a decade. So back in 2019, there were 177 Barnstable residents attending Sturgis. And that delta is the other way, about almost 50 kids. So there are almost 50 more kids who reside in the town of Barnstable that are this year, right now, attending Sturgis East or West. So again, the age ranges aren't an exact match, but if you compare Oak Ridge and Barnstable United, it's about the same enrollment number. Those first two bars are about 10 times larger at Barnstable. So when you look at the current, I guess that would be, that was 4 through, oh gosh, I think that's 4 or 5. Karen, is that 4 or 5? Yeah. So the current 5th and 6th, for the most part, the current students in 5th or 6th grade in the town of Barnstable attending a public school, almost a third of them spoke a first language other than English. Almost 15% of them are currently classified by the state as English language learners who are receiving that direct service. It's about 10 times, a factor of 10 difference between the two communities. So Barnstable is evolving. Sandwich's numbers have stayed pretty consistent. But there's been an interesting flashpoint. Because we draw from everywhere. We have no influence over that, but we have influence where we try to recruit. Which brings me to my next slide. So again, 2016, Christine is probably here somewhere. That was the first year that Christine McDowell and I and other members of the administrative team started getting ahead of what we wanted to be a reality, which is how do we plan for an English language learner program at Sturgis, because in 2016, we didn't have a single student classified as an English language learner or formally as an English language learner. Teachers in traditional public schools who have licenses were required to get SEI certified. Our teachers were not required. So we had to try to figure out how to develop something that was going to be transformative and well received and organic. 6 years later, I'll present you some data. And actually, that should say 22, 23, my apologies. The green numbers represent west, the blue numbers represent east. So 6 years ago, we didn't have an English learner. Now we have 12, with 2/3 of them being at West. 6 years ago, we didn't have any classified former English language learners. Now we have 23, with over 80% of them being happening to be concentrated at West. And then the last column are those families who have asked for required translation services or interpretation. And that's 37, but interestingly, it's not the same. It all sort of seems to add up like those are the same families. They are not. Because we have about 18 different languages spoken by families. So Emily Mazel creates translations for that many different languages. So this says a lot of interesting things to me, and it's probably the subject of a whole day-long discussion, conversation amongst all of us. Some of the things that it tells me, first of all, is the reality that we had hoped for a few years ago, and we're building for a few years ago, is happening. It's occurring. We didn't have control over it, but it's coming, and now things like the sibling enrollment preference might really be working in our favor as we continue this to nurture, and we hope to see this grow and thrive. And it's also interesting to me that for whatever reason, and I don't think there's any way that anybody can honestly say they know why, whatever reason, West has significantly more students classified in these ways than East. It's also interesting to me that that's West 1 year was, the graduating class was half filled with sandwich kids. And so there's an interesting sort of development there, and that kind of healthy tension there between communities. And I don't know what the numbers are going to look like. I think there's another student starting today or tomorrow. Christine, am I right? That falls into one of these categories. And our enrollment period is happening now. And Pollyanna continues to do more outreach, and the word is spreading because more people are sensing what home feels like, and they want to share that. So I have my own related goals that the board creates for me in consultation. One goal is that we don't have to have an indoor graduation in the parking lots where I record my address. And the other goal is that, pandemic or not, my hair never looks like that ever again. So along with the board, their job is to learn about it. I'm a board member, but my job is also to work with the administrative team in conjunction with all of you to try to get a sense for what this means to societal destabilization, student well-being and learning. We're looking at different data sources. We're looking at surveys to administer, trying to be thoughtful about this and not rush into any sort of knee-jerk responses. We're very fortunate that Darnisa Amante Jackson worked with Sturgis last year in order to create a very tailored, thoughtful, dynamic job description, which led to the process of recruitment, which led to us having Jessica Lynch and Melissa Race co-leading the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging Department, which this year has really emphasized the belonging, because that's what Darnisa had advised. But I'm fortunate, as others in the community, that this plan that I'm tasked with creating is not going to be sort of something just drummed up from me. The idea is that I've been working closely with Jessica and Melissa throughout the year, so that next year's plan, which everybody can see, is hopefully well thought out and connected with a lot of the things that I just described to you. And then coming back to our being here today, and I'm going to explain a little bit more backwards and forwards about why 529 is important. But what the board has asked from me by the end of the year is to create a plan about how the community and our communities will know what 529 can mean for them. I'll talk to you more in a second. And then finally, building off the work that the board, that Camille, that Rachel, that Pollyanna have been doing in terms of enrollment process, making sure that all of our communities within the Cape, Plymouth, Carver, Wareham know what Sturgis can be for them, and to know that we want them. So how do we make sure, how do we do that actively? So those are 4 goals that they have for me. And hopefully, if we're faithful to why we're here, those goals connect back to those 3 same questions. Who are our students now? Who are our students going to be in the future? And then to that idea of home. How are we ensuring that it feels like home to an increasingly diverse collection of Sturgis students and faculty? So as I looked at the list of offerings for today, those questions seem to be quite relevant. I won't even highlight 1 or 2 here at the risk of not highlighting all of them, but if you think about which sessions you've signed up for, or if you just do a quick bottom-up or top-down scan of that list, who are our students? Who are our future students? How are we creating a home for them? I think are part and parcel not only to a homecoming dance, to the board goals, to our marketing, to my goals, but to our goals. And so we meet here at 529 Main. And I mentioned that there's a forward story and a backward story about 529 Main. So we bought this, I think, in around 2017 or 18 or so. We did some upgrades. It was a step in the process of what it was always going to become. COVID happened, and the bowling alley happened, not quite in that order. Now that we've come back together, and things are a bit more normal, we can resume with what our vision is going to be for this place and always has been. So the architect that helped us to design 441 Main, the bowling alley addition, is working with us on the build out of this process. This is the first example. These are 4 of 19 professional mobile stage units to improve upon our previous pieces of staging. I won't walk through all of this, but suffice to say that in the coming years, professional acoustical tiles of many different layers on top, professional sound, curtains that are movable, professional lighting. The idea that this is a place where the little shop of horrors 4 years from now takes place to really reinforce for our kids that sense of home. But it's not just for our kids. I don't expect that you pour over the things that I send you every now and then. And if you were here 4.5 years ago, you may not have even looked through this entire document. But we created about 4.5 years ago a vision statement for what we wanted Sturgis 529 Main to be. 529 Main sits nearly equidistant to Sturgis East and West and is convenient to public transportation. As such, it is an ideal location for students, faculty, and parents to convene for educational purposes, after-school performing and creative art shows, service projects, celebrations and gatherings, and special events. East and West should have equitable access and usage, as should individual departments, counseling, athletics, for meeting and banquets, not as a practice venue. Your time is ticking, Kaylee. Administration, arts, academic departments, etc., with priority given to April and May for the administration of IB-related examinations. But it's the last paragraph in particular that I want you to see. Sturgis intends for 529 Main to be a venue of interest for local community organizations, particularly nonprofits, interested in developing a strong working relationship with Sturgis. Priority is to be given to organizations that can support Sturgis initiatives to increase the diversity of our applicant pool. The Hyannis International Film Festival has been held here. Amplify VOC Cape Cod's upcoming holiday festival will be held here this weekend. We know about the Latina Festival that was held here. So just like our classes, and in particular West right now, is rich with students speaking in their mother tongue, not English, examining OPCVL, in their classes, just like our students who grew up on the Cape who are learning Spanish are now benefiting from having more native Spanish speakers to interact with, so too 529 Main will not only become vibrant from within, but it'll become more vibrant and dynamic between us and local organizations. Because remember, we can't predict the future, we don't know how this is going to go, but about 10 or 11 years ago, we switched to having Sandwich as our #1 district by a sizable amount, and then all the data that I shared with you sort of flowed from there. And that's what just happened again. So when we think about the current 4th, 5th, and 6th graders at Barnstable, we can't help but think about the fact that we're creating a reality for them to come in 3 to 4 years. Because that's the goal. It's that homecoming. It's that sense of belonging. It's that sense of welcoming. It's that sense of our kids coming here, perhaps like Pollyanna in middle school from a different country, and then realizing that Sturgis is a place where they can not only go, but that they're really wanted, and that they're going to become better from that, and that they know that we think we're going to become better from that. And that takes all of us, that sense. And I think that we're playing from a position of strength because our heart has always been our strength. So thank you for your hearts in the last half hour. Thank you for your attention. Please take some cookies and whatnot on your way out. Hopefully I timed it so that it's not raining. If it is, blame Jen and Patrick for their timing. Thank you so much.